Hello everyone, my name is Cilantro. Welcome to my Factorio Tutorio about underground belts and a few advanced techniques you can use with them. Just to cover the basics, underground belts are used to allow you to move objects underneath other objects. Pretty straightforward. They're extensions of the regular colored types of transport belt. So just like there are the yellow normal transport belts, there are yellow underground belts, and so on. Underground belts can actually crisscross underground, despite the fact that it looks like there's an outline that would prevent that. This is very important. Underground belts can only traverse 4 extra tiles underground. Any further than that, and they won't actually make it. I can show you that here by attempting to connect, and it won't let me go any further. And different types or colors of underground belts can actually be placed essentially right next to each other. If you can see here, I have an underground belt that goes very briefly underground, while simultaneously a yellow belt goes underneath all of that. If I were to try to do this with only one single color, it would form one continuous belt. But with 2 separate colors, each of these is their own belt. By combining these techniques, you can make what I call braids. There are 2 different versions that I've come up with. This is a 2-color braid, this is a 3-color braid. I call them braids because they overlap belts in the same area, similar to how you might braid some hair by making them overlap each other. This allows you to have 2 different products, or even 2 lines of the same product, going through the same horizontal or vertical space. The 3-braid line tends to be not quite as useful because due to the long nature of each of these belts and the fact that they have to go over 4 squares, you can't actually really get very easy access points. The only way to really have an access point is to entirely branch off, so I would only recommend using this if you really need to move a ton of a single product through a long distance via conveyor belts. Just to show that this does in fact work, I will throw off a couple of each color onto each belt, and we'll see them come out at the other end on the correct belts. I'll do that over here as well. One of the principal reasons you would want to use a braid, especially the 2-color braid, is it makes it significantly easier to deliver materials to any crafting machines that require 3 or 4 ingredients. You can weave all of the ingredients onto a single horizontal line, making the access significantly easier. In addition, you can even use multiple braids in smaller areas to achieve similar results. And as you can see here, each of the products made it all the way through and onto the exact line that they were meant to be on. Here's an example of a 2-belt braid, the red line being the input, taking in copper and iron gear wheels, both of which are required to make Science Packs 1, and the yellow line being the output line. Notice that the belts interweave with one another, and that each of the assembly machines has both an input and an output. If I enable these, you'll see very quickly that the construction process is able to go on. See, once this has obtained all the resources that it needs, materials will be made, output onto the conveyor, and make it through the braid. Here, instead of using a separate input and output line on a single braid, 2 input lines are braided together. In the case of the incredibly frustrating to make Science Pack 3s, we have all 4 materials being brought in on a single horizontal line. The output line is a blue belt just for reference and contrast. As you can see, if you examine any given crafting station, you'll see a long-handed inserter in this case pulling from the red belt, a long-handed inserter pulling from the yellow belt, and a short regular inserter putting on the blue belt, the output belt. Likewise on the other side, 2 short inserters, one of which is pulling from the red belt, one of which is pulling from the yellow belt, and a long-handed inserter which outputs the product. The inputs are now on their way. As you can see as we get close, all of the inserters are doing their work. You can already hear the machines churning out their products, and in no time we'll have numerous items going down the belt, all according to plan. One of the advantages of using a braid system is it allows you to put electric poles right in the middle of the area, allowing for a more compact design. As you can see, this entire design is easily replicated out in the horizontal fashion, and otherwise fits in a very comfortable and nice and clean footprint. One of the problems that may arise if you're using braids to move materials a long distance is an unevenness between the two belts if you're pulling more from one than the other. It's important to have merge stations eventually to even that out. Do note that compression between the two belts will vary as they are different speeds, and I would highly recommend using the best compression you can for the merge points. Blue if you can, and if not, whatever you can afford. Just to show what this looks like, I will power these inserters up, and you can see they are starting off exclusively on the yellow belt with more or less maximum compression, and they're going to be distributed onto both belts by the end of it. You can also see that on occasion you may need to do split merges back into each individual setup. This can be avoided by having the same input on both belts, meaning if you have input coming on both belts, this awkward split where only one side will be filled at first can be avoided because the other ones will take care of it. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to present to you what I call chains. Many of you are likely familiar with the concept of a main bus, wherein a large number of materials are transported on directly adjacent transport belts through your base, and the materials are just peeled off from various areas as needed. It's a great way to do things, but it does have some flaws. And this is a potential alternative that solves some of those issues while, of course, introducing a few of their own. There's no such thing as a perfect design in Factorio. Things will always have a trade-off, and that's really one of the strengths of the game. The idea behind the chain is that you keep a large amount of area accessible to various different inputs and outputs. The entire chain can be fed in at any given place, and likewise taken out of at any given place, and you will be able to ensure that the distribution of products will even itself out over time. This allows you to have a much longer bus with more input locations, and ensure that if one part of the bus is the chain bus is taking materials, that it's not going to necessarily prevent other areas from taking materials as well. To show you how it fills and how fun it is to watch, I will enable these inserters here, and you can watch it do its magic. As you can see, the materials are starting to distribute. I'm going to go ahead and cut the power here real quickly. And you can see that even though the center chains seem to have a lot more material, as soon as it all evens out, and if you give it a little bit, it becomes fairly evident that the distribution is roughly even. And just to prove the point, I'm going to take an arbitrary amount from this side here, and if given a little bit of time, and really not that much time, you can see that the belts are already starting to even out again. It will take a while, but they will get there. So using this in any given length, you can guarantee that your materials will be distributed fairly and evenly. This allows you, one of the greatest strengths of this is that instead of having a linear bus wherein you have a single direction, you now have a bidirectional bus where if you need to pull a piece that's made on a later portion back to an earlier place, you no longer have to worry about having two different directions of conveyor belts that could otherwise get confused, since everything is continually flowing in any given direction. Even with the chains extended here, and also with turns in the chains, you can see that the system still maintains a relatively balanced distribution of materials. These chain intersections allow you, of course, to deviate from the master chain to allow your various assembly machines to pick up the resources that they need to finish these products. Again, just to reiterate, due to the size of this, unless you have an incredibly massive base, I would only really advise using chains for copper and iron plates. That's really all I had to say about braids and chains. I encourage you to go out and experiment with them yourself. There are a few other nice little subtle things that you'll come to realize that they will benefit you with. And in addition, you can actually even combine the two of them with some very creative block placement, making essentially braided chains. But I'll leave that up to you to discover. One other final note. One of the nicest things about this system, since it does tend to distribute the product relatively evenly, is that it makes it very easy to bleed off a small percentage for personal use. If you're like me, there's a number of times where you'd have to run off to your main lines to grab vast swaths of material, which would cause a disruption in the production of whatever you're making. Whereas with this system, a single chest with a very slow inserter will very slowly pick apart pieces from the material line at an even rate. So there you go, braids and chains. Thank you for watching the video. Thank you for liking the video and subscribing, and I'll see you next time.